chapter 17, verses 1 through 9. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And Jesus was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, "This is my Son, the Beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." Here ends our readings. May God bless our understanding of God's holy word.
Will you join me in prayer? God, may these reflections find their way to the hearts of these listeners. Amen.
Amen.
A few years ago, my husband and I splurged for an anniversary, and we bought tickets to Cirque du Soleil. Maybe you've heard of it, or maybe you've been. It's a sort of a new wave circus. So it's got incredibly skilled performers on stages that move, musicians who sing while they spin in the air, water suddenly pours down from the middle of the stage. It's really incredible. There are all kinds of surprises that show up on that evening. So we got all dressed up, we took the requisite photos outside the tent, we headed in, and the show started. At first, the show was an utter delight for me. And then, the performance got a little more technical. And I got a little more nervous. They had acrobats leaping and spinning and crossing each other while they soared through the air on these really high ledges. And they would catch each other and spin each other back in the air. It was a marvel of human effort, of practice, of impeccable timing, of artistry. It was a mini miracle happening right in front of my eyes. Except I couldn't see it, because my eyes were closed. I was so nervous that someone would slip or lose their grip or get the timing off, and I would have to watch them tumble to the ground, that I just could not relax and enjoy the performance. I didn't trust their artistry and confidence more than I trusted my own fear. So I spent half the show shielding my eyes from the performance that we had showed up to watch. I missed the moment. I couldn't help but relate to Jesus' disciples in this story that comes to us from Matthew today. First, their friend and teacher transforms in front of their very eyes. Then, Moses and Elijah show up for a chat. Then, God God's self speaks up from a cloud. It's no wonder that they threw themselves down. But then when Jesus touches them, when they look up, it's all gone. It's over. They missed the moment. Transfiguration Sunday has always fascinated fascinated me. What the heck happened up there on that mountain, and why? I did learn some things in preparing for today that I'm eager to share with you, but the main thing that I learned is that what happened on that mountain was a mystical experience. And like all mystical experiences, it's not something you can parse very well. Nobody really has an explanation for this enormous event that appears to happen to Jesus in today's reading. It just is. Unless you miss it. This mystical mountaintop event happens at a pivot point of sorts in Jesus' life. From ministry in the small rural population of Galilee toward his final end in busy Jerusalem. It's an important moment, and it's one that appears in 3 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's a moment that clearly marks Jesus not just as a really excellent rabbi. It's a moment that Jesus' divinity beams from his very self and becomes evident not just to him, but to those close to him. Earlier in Matthew, Jesus had been bringing some heavy-duty preaching and healing to the people around Galilee. You've been hearing scripture and sermons from some of that teaching about right relationship and transforming our lives and the Beatitudes. Just prior to this story, Jesus held a conversation with his disciples where Peter announces Jesus' role as the Messiah, and Jesus announces his end and then consoles his friends over it. It's been an intense time for Jesus. And, after tons of social interactions and having super deep conversations, I like to head up to a mountain with friends to clear my head too. But it's relevant to our understanding to pause to learn a bit more about the other similar story we heard today that involves a mountain. Because you remember that the people hearing this story about Jesus were well familiar with the story about Moses and the mountaintop. The people in Moses' time had a really different understanding of who God was than ours today. They understood that gods were affiliated with certain geographical regions and hung out in the heavens above that area. And you accessed your God by creating a holy pathway of sorts, like the tabernacle. Or you could head up to the heavens where your God kind of lived via, say, a mountain. The presence of clouds also indicated the presence of that God. As we hear in this scripture, the glory of the Lord settled on Mount Sinai. It reminds me of the lenticular clouds that are sometimes present over Mount Rainier with their Friday night, sort of hover over that mountain. When Moses enters that cloud, the people of Israel understood him to be in direct communion with God. So we've got this passage teed out with Jesus sharing that he's the awaited Messiah, and then he heads up a mountain with his closest disciple, just like Moses. So the scene is set for some kind of heavenly encounter, and wow, does this story deliver. Before Jesus and his friends have even caught their breath from the climb or taken in the view, Jesus begins to change before their very eyes. With the beautiful descriptions of his glowing face and his clothing beaming light, I think the text is trying to get at a transformation that's beyond the physical one that revealed the divinity within Jesus. At that moment, I believe that the intermingling of Jesus' humanity and divinity became visible. What had been a regular man suddenly was revealed to also, at the same time, contain the glory of God. What a miracle. And before we've had a chance to process this incredible event, Moses and Elijah appear to them. Both were powerful figures in religious and spiritual authority of different eras to the Israelite people, and both had been taken up to the heavens. And here they were, coming back to chat with Jesus. Just in case we haven't somehow caught on about Jesus' special role, God shows up and announces it very clearly using the same language that God used at Jesus' baptism. This is my Son, the Beloved. With him I am well pleased. And now God adds, listen to him. I can only imagine what it would be like to encounter that much mystery, that much inexplicable, that much God's glory all at once. But what I can relate to is not being able to handle it. While I yearn for even a glimpse of an encounter like this, it's the disciples and their human response that I understand here. Busying themselves with chores, trying to make an ephemeral moment last, hiding their faces from the intensity of it. I get that. There have been times in my life where I feel like I have gotten a glimpse of the Holy Mystery. I remember when I snorkeled for the first time, and I came to understand that there was an entire world under the waterline that existed. I remember walking out accompanied by my family to meet the man I was to marry, who was accompanied by his family, and being overcome by the miracle of it all. These are some of the moments when God's glory is unmistakable. Sometimes this glimpse of God's glory feels a bit more ordinary. I spent the last weekend at the coast with my family, and one night I walked alone in the dark along the shore. The crest of the waves glowed white as they crashed and rolled in, and the stars overhead kept me company in that moonless sky. Ordinary shore, ordinary night, transfigured with God's glory. Simpler, softer moments too, when God shows up, walking into my house after a long day, putting on my pajamas, and watching a show snuggled up with my kids. Sometimes the glory of God shows up like it did during Transfiguration. A flesh and blood man suddenly revealed to contain God's glory. And sometimes the glory of God shows up in ordinary moments, and we can see just how divine that moment is. I wonder, how do we respond to these holy miracles in our midst? How do we encounter God's glory when it reveals itself to us? Peter makes me laugh in this passage with his very earnest and very human response. When Moses and Elijah shows up, he offers to build them each a tent. Most scholars imagine that he's offering to build them the kind of tent as they would for the festival of Sukkot, which stay up for a week and are sort of dwelling places. I can relate to his impulse. An amazing moment happens, and instead of being present to it, to attending to it, I busy myself with supporting it somehow, with well-meaning efforts to make it last longer. And in doing so, I often miss the moment. It's like when you attend a performance, I've never done this, and you want to capture it to make it last or maybe share it with your friends, so you fire up your phone to record it, and then you end up watching the performance through your screen instead of the actual performance that you showed up to watch. It's not only technology that we use to distract ourselves from the holy that is revealing itself in front of us. It can be busyness, action, and joyful and painful moments. I accompanied a family recently who had to make the hard choice of allowing their father to be released to death after a terrible fall. As they sat by his bedside in the immediate wake of his passing, in that sacred moment, the conversation began to turn to the logistics of his absence, like how they would tell people, and who would check on the house, and which funeral home they should use. Understandable. But that is a moment that won't come again, and one that we do not want to miss. miss. I wonder, what are the ways that you might have missed the moment by trying to make it last? Or by moving into busyness? How would it feel to release those security rails of longevity, of action, and to just sit in what is happening? In the pain of it, in the mystery of it, in the glory of it. Just to be present to its unfolding. I wonder too, the way we shield our eyes from seeing, that we throw ourselves to the ground to keep from taking in, as did Jesus' closest disciples. And then by the time we realize we don't have anything to fear, the moment has passed. God's glory has returned to its more ordinary shape. There have been times where I have held another's gaze, where it has felt so raw, so tender, that I've averted my eyes. There have been times when I've been riding the ferry and the wind and the scenery and the power have been right there for me to take in. And I have headed under deck to wait out the ride. There's been times where my vulnerable truth was on the tip of my tongue, and the glory of God was waiting in the wings to appear at that moment of honesty between us. And instead, I have metaphorically thrown myself down, shielding myself from exposure, and closing myself to that sacred moment. What is it, I wonder, that keeps us from being fully present, fully showing up, encountering God's glory when it is right in front of us? How do you turn away when suddenly the ordinary is revealed to be beaming with divinity right in front of your very eyes? I confess that I don't fully understand what happened to Jesus on that mountaintop. But I believe something holy happened. Something that allowed he and his disciples to encounter the glory of God. And as we say in the UCC, that God is still speaking. I believe that God is still showing up in our midst, revealing God's self among us, beaming God's divinity throughout our human encounters and everyday lives, in both ordinary and extraordinary ways. And as we close the season of Epiphany today, the season of the star in our midst, and turn our attending to the quiet, reflective season of Lent, I invite you to step into seeing, to step into being with, to step into encountering God's glory in your life. Amen.
Amen.